Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
Here's our topic for today, and it's a really important and interesting topic. It is the use of committees, of volunteers and committees in capital campaign fundraising. And I'm going to tell you a story to kick us off, because it's a story that came out of a conversation I had this morning with a group that is going to be working with the Capital Campaign Toolkit. And we were talking about timing, right? And the guy I was talking to said, he said, we hope to do our guided feasibility study in the fall, and then we're going to raise all of our leadership gifts by, I don't know, March or something like that, or, we're going to get right on going, and then we're going to kick off the public phase of the campaign in the spring, and we're going to be done. So it was interesting. Now, any of you who know a lot about capital campaigns, or even a little about capital campaigns, may suspect that timeline, which is about 9 months that he outlined, is not likely to be a real timeline. So I was trying to think about how to explain to him why the quiet phase of the campaign, when you solicit all these large gifts from people, takes so long. And finally, having told him about this and that and the other thing, I said, the reason that the early part of a campaign, the planning part and the campaign itself, takes so long is because you're spending a lot of time engaging donors, involving donors in the campaign process itself. And for almost any organization that has done a successful campaign, when they go to the end of the campaign, they get to the end, they get to their success. If they check off how many people gave the largest gifts or the top half of the gifts, and they figure out how many of those people were actively involved on a committee, right, or as a volunteer in some way with the campaign, what you're going to find is that the percentage of people who were involved in your campaign, who also gave significant gifts, is incredibly high. So large gifts don't just happen. You cultivate them to make them happen. And one of the powerful ways you do that in the context of a capital campaign is that you create opportunities for it. Right? You create opportunities for people to get engaged and get involved and serve on a committee and serve on a core committee, or come to help you with a case for support, or participate in a committee, in a lead gift committee, or a donor communications committee, or a campaign steering committee. I know.
Before you go down too far down the road with committees, although I love you for that, Andrea, let's first set the stage about campaign committees, because most people believe that there's one large, huge campaign committee with, 50 or 100 names on it. And that's not the way we look at it. So start from the beginning. What's your philosophy on campaign committees?
That they're important. That we should have them.
Yes.
We should have them. That's my philosophy.
Yes. They're important.
And that they are structured as relatively short-term. Most of them are structured as relatively short-term ad hoc committees or task forces.
See,
that's the key. Some of them meet a short time, and some of them may meet over a longer time.
And I think that that's the important thing that really people need to wrap their minds and their brains around, is that it's not one massive campaign committee where you need to identify all your campaign volunteers at the very, very beginning of the campaign and ask them to serve for 2 or 3 years for the duration of your campaign. The beauty of ad hoc free flowing, what's another word we use for this, sort of fluid campaign committees, is that they can come and go as the tasks and the responsibilities rise and fall with the flow and the strategy and the plan of the campaign. And so not everybody needs to serve for 3 years on the entire campaign committee. Of course, they'll be listed as a campaign committee participant, but you do want to have lots of short and longer and shorter and bigger and smaller groups that meet for periods of times and for different tasks. And that way, if you have somebody who's a great volunteer, you can ask them to serve again. And if you have somebody who maybe didn't rise to the occasion, they participated, but you can thank them, let them go. They don't have to continue to serve for the duration of the campaign. They can participate for a short chunk, like helping develop the plan or organizing one small event or reviewing the feasibility study. There's lots of pieces of the campaign that they can participate in, subcommittees or ad hoc committees. You can call them probably whatever you want at your organization. All right. What else, Andrea?
So, I mean, I think this is such an overlooked part of campaigns. And of course, when you make a commitment to using volunteers, to engaging volunteers in short or longer term assignments, you better figure out how to do that well, right? Because if you just invite people and then talk at them, and then end your meetings, it won't take very long before they're not going to show up at those meetings, right? You have to really take it quite seriously. So I'm involved in a campaign. It's one of my favorite campaigns at the moment, actually. And we have had this funny problem with those campaign committees. And the people in that organization have planned and run those committee meetings so well that when we get to the place where it's time for the committee to come to an end because they've done their work, they don't want to quit. They don't want to stop. It's like that we have to figure out something to do with them because they're really not happy to go away, right? I figure that's what you want, right? You want people who have who feel like their expertise and that they really bring something to the table in the committees, that they really help move the campaign forward, that the committees are well enough structured and organized so that they're not just wallpaper, right? They actually are functional. And to do that takes a fair amount of thought and energy, right? In this organization I referred to, we probably spend as much time thinking through the agendas for those committee meetings as the committee meetings themselves. Right, to be sure that the agenda is clear, that we have crafted it in a way that people really will have something to say and something to contribute in the meetings, that we know what we want to get out of each of the meetings, right? And if you do that and then really have a good facilitator, what you'll find is that people draw closer and closer to the campaign. They get more and more committed. And in fact, they do great work. They really do help move the campaign forward.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important piece of the puzzle. If you find that you're creating a campaign committee agenda and one or two people are doing all the talking and reporting out, scrap the agenda. You haven't done it right. So there need to be multiple opportunities during the course of a meeting where you go around and ask everybody for their input, their feedback, their thoughts, their opinions. So figure out what's the discussion topic for the meeting. What input do you need from the committee members in order to make them feel valued, for there to be purpose for them to be serving on the committee? Because nobody needs to show up for your committee meeting just to hear an update or a report. What they want to do is participate and feel valued. And so it is more work up front to really think about, how is this meeting going to be structured so that we're actually asking for the opinion or having a discussion of everybody in the room? And we're going to go around conscientiously at least twice, whether you're on Zoom or in person, but making sure that everybody in the room speaks at least twice. Otherwise, they didn't need to be there. You could have just sent them a report.
That we have a question here about one that Karen has asked, can we give some examples of the types of committees? So actually what I did was I just pulled up, and I am not going to share this with you because it is confidential for my clients, but I can tell you what's on it. So take some notes if you wish. But here are the committees of this client I was telling you about. So they have an events task force. Right? The events task force assists in planning campaign events. This task force will be involved in the discussion around the planning of major events and will help coordinate additional logistics when needed. This group does not require regular meetings and will meet on an as needed basis. I'm just giving you an example here. They have a donor engagement task force, which will assist with donor cultivation and will offer strategic insight on cultivation activities. They have a campaign communications task force. They have a lead gift committee. They have a board member task force that actually helps with the process of soliciting all of the board members. They have a community campaign committee. And the community campaign works on engaging the committee in which their project is going to be built. They have a business and foundation committee responsible for soliciting corporations, businesses, and local foundations, and so forth. That's not the entire list, but it'll give you a sense. To figure out what committees you need, you have to look to see what needs to be done. And then you put together the people who have some expertise in doing that, and you actually have them help you. So that at every meeting, or at least some meetings, they can report on what it is they've done since the last meeting. It's actually quite important and quite sophisticated to do that well, right? And I think many people give in to the notion of inviting people to a meeting, lecturing an update at them, saying, thank you very much, we'll see you in a month, and being done. And that just doesn't work very well.
So Andy's asking, how big is this organization and who is staffing all of these committees?
Well,
Andrea.
I'll tell you, it's a great question. It's actually quite a small organization. And they have one development director and development assistant. They have a COO, kind of someone who actually runs the organization, and an executive director. Right now they have some other people, but those are the ones that are relevant to this. And they staff all of these committees because the committees don't happen at the same time, right? It's not like all of a sudden you wake up one morning and you have 10 committees you have to deal with. They cycle in and cycle out as the needs of the campaign shift, right? And in the end, it makes a huge difference to the success of the campaign. Right now with Zoom, the ability to have a committee, I think, has been greatly facilitated. So if you get good at running Zoom meetings in a really effective way, it's much easier, right? You don't need refreshments. You don't need before the meeting and after the meeting. You don't need to bird dog people. In our experience, people tend to show up more. They tend to show up on time, right? Have you noticed that people show up to Zoom meetings on time? It's fascinating. So Zoom, I think, has made this whole structure easier.
There's no commuting, there's no parking, there's no traffic. So there's, you can be more on time.
Here's something interesting about Zoom. We've often talked when we were doing meetings live about the parking lot conversations, right? Some of you've heard about parking lot conversations. It's when people come to a meeting and they sit there quietly and don't say a darn thing. And then you go to the parking lot and you see people chit-chatting by their cars, right? Sort of telling the other people what they really thought, right? So it's interesting to think about what Zoom does to the parking lot. Right. It's also interesting to me to see that if you run a Zoom committee meeting well, you actually can easily go around all of the tiles and ask people. You can get people to participate in some sense more easily than if they were in person. So My instinct is that to have an out of committee negative conversation, meeting, which often happens in the parking lot, somebody has to really initiate that. It doesn't happen naturally by itself. So that's interesting.
So a couple of things. Tell people that you're going to be going around the Zoom tiles so they pay attention. You don't want to catch people off guard, but let them know. This is the order I'll be going in, and you could just say, I'll be going in the order I see you on my screen, right? And I'll be calling on everybody to get your feedback and opinions. So be ready. Here's the topic, right? We want to hear from everybody. So you'll let them know in advance that you're calling on them. So I just wanted to also add that last week on the Capital Campaign Toolkit blog, we posted about core committee. So the core committee, or your kitchen cabinet committee, is probably the one campaign committee that's going to last for the duration of your campaign. And it's just 5 or 6 of the key people at your organization that are seeing the campaign through from beginning to end. Now, as you picture, what most people think about the campaign committee, if you hear most organizations talking about it, they're talking about every volunteer for the whole campaign. So that's a term for the umbrella. Over the entire campaign, you have the campaign committee. But what we're talking about are all the subcommittees, all the ad hoc committees, all the task forces that come and go and participate when it's appropriate and necessary throughout the campaign. So I think we also answered just now Vicky's question. It was the same as Andy, who manages all the committees. So, probably not the consultant. Consultant
doesn't manage the committees, but the consultant should be able to help to say, well, these are the committees and this is what their brief might be. I mean, a consultant can, and then when a committee, when there is a role for the consultant to come in and do a report or something, the consultant will participate in that way. So at the toolkit, for example, right, our toolkit advisors do a fair amount to help say, well, here's a committee that you should structure, and sometimes sitting in on a committee meeting. So they're not doing the committees, but they're also not out of the loop of the committees either.
Yeah. I mean, I think more of our role as, here's the kind of committees you should think about having. Here are the types of people you want on the committees and that we should try and recruit to the committees. Here is the job description of those committees. And here are some sample agendas. I mean, those are the types of things that we have in the toolkit and that our advisors work with our clients on. And so, they probably wouldn't be involved in facilitating the committee meeting or even at all of the committees, but they would help the staff prepare for the materials and the agenda and what the outcome hopefully is. So it just depends on the structure and setup at your organization.
So Trinkar has asked a follow-up question that will be helpful to people. She says, could you say more about what a donor engagement committee might do? So let's run that through just because it's easy and interesting. It's like, all right, there are many things that you and your organization might do to engage donors in your organization and in the plans that you're working for the capital campaign. There are whole bunches of things. Things like inviting people in for tours, scheduling meetings with some of your key volunteers or board members to talk to people about the campaign, inviting them to small events where they might actually see how your program currently functions and understand the need. Having larger cultivation events. Those are just a beginning. You could probably come up with 4 or 5 other things. What you might do is to pull a small group of people together in a donor engagement committee, and you might have a brainstorm. What are all the things we might do to start to draw people who are our donors closer to this project? And let people help you think that through. Then when you have a list of all the things you might do, you can say, all right, how do we prioritize these? What of these should we be doing now? And who on this group is going to be able and willing to help us? Right? So this is not rocket science. It's really not. It's saying, what are the problems? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities we face? let's pull a group of people together to help us think that through. And then let's engage them in helping to make whatever it is they came up with help. Reality.
I mean, one of the things that we always talk about in fundraising is donor engagement and asking for advice, right? So you're really, truly, genuinely going to your donors and lead volunteers and saying, help us figure out how to engage our donors. How would you like to be engaged? How would your friends like to be engaged? How should we engage the community? Well, I'd like to actually turn this over to the chat and to all the brilliant people listening today. So two questions. One, what are the different committees that you're using and subcommittees and task forces? Because I know there's so many people who have already gone through campaigns or in the middle of campaigns. So in the chat box, let us know what committees, task force, subcommittees are you using for your campaign currently? And also a second question to Trinkar's question, what types of donor engagement are you doing? What might you ask that committee to do? What are you having your volunteers do? So that would be great. So let's go ahead and see what we can come up with in the chat box here and turn to one more question. Andrea, you have one, or you want me to? All right, let's go to Paul's question since he was first.
Yeah.
So Paul's asking, since some nonprofits can be effective agents of social change in becoming a for-profit enterprise. So I'm not sure that I would word it that way. I think what you're talking about, your example is Goodwill Industries. So some nonprofits do have revenue generating centers. I think that's what you're talking about. And what are effective strategies to attract donors for a capital campaign? Holding out the prospect of converting a donation into an investment. So, the terminology here, we could debate for a while. I think we won't. To me, the really important difference of a nonprofit versus a for-profit enterprise, using the language that Paul is using, is tax status, of course, of the organization, but also in terms of what do you do with your profits? A nonprofit should be profitable, and donors do make investments. What is done with those profits and investments in a nonprofit is usually, a mission-based, cause-based organization is different than what a for-profit would do in terms of paying owners or stakeholders or whatever the case may be. But let's get to the point about effective strategies to attract donors for a capital campaign. I think that's the crux of the question here. Andrea, did you read that differently or want to add something?
No, I just want to share something that is quite interesting to me. And one of the Capital Campaign Toolkit clients has really opened our eyes to the possibility of having of going through a campaign to raise money for two things. On one side, philanthropic gifts that support the mission of the organization and their project they want to do. On the other side, to invite donors to be what they call, I believe, impact investors, right? To actually make an investment on which they will make a return. And what they are finding is that the very same people are doing both. Right? Out of one pocket, they are giving significant gifts. And out of the other pocket, they are actually investing in the organization. Now, in order to do that, of course, in order to have impact investing be a part of what you do, you need income to offset what it is you're going to have to pay people for what they're lending you, right? I mean, impact investing is that they lend you money and you pay them interest. And there are terms of that. But we have now a very good example where the very same donors, right, are happy to do both for the very same project, right, and are happy with the opportunities to do that. And that if you look at how much money is coming into the organization, it is actually significantly more than would have come in had they just been after philanthropic contributions. So that to me is really interesting. The whole idea of impact investing is interesting.
Yeah. And I think, a couple of people in the chat box have been asking about revenue, right? Revenue for a nonprofit. And lots of nonprofits have fee for service models. And so anything that's membership based, the YMCA is a fee for service model. They would generate revenue through camps and other things. So hospitals certainly generate fees, and there are nonprofit organizations. So there are tons of examples of organizations that would generate fees, maybe not campaign related, but ongoing revenue generation. And they're still nonprofit organizations.
If you are interested in learning more about this sort of dual model, you can check out the website of Northern Forest Center, because I think they actually talk about both sides of this on their website. It's a pretty interesting organization, and there's stuff on their website. And if you're really interested, I'm sure you can get in touch with their founder or executive director.
Okay. Sandy, I see your question in the chat box. I don't want to lose track of it. If you could open up the Q&A box and put it there, then we can pay attention more closely to whose questions we've answered. And not, we'll get to it in a minute, but if you can, and that goes for everybody, of course, put your questions in the Q&A box. All right.
All right. Anonymous has said, I'm always so curious whether Anonymous is always the same Anonymous or a different Anonymous.
A few times they've said no. Right. So I think there's a few people who ask questions anonymously.
Okay. Right. So can we talk about writing capital campaign policies? We're struggling with donor naming policies. How do we ensure that our wonderful donors get the recognition they deserve while covering issues like phasing out of named gifts? This is a big and important topic that in my mind these days actually starts before your question. And I am sort of beginning to seriously question the wisdom of naming opportunities, but that's heresy in the nonprofit world and the capital campaign world. So don't get me wrong. I am not suggesting that you don't do it, just to tell you that I am questioning it. I am questioning it because in most campaigns, we do a lousy job of recognizing people for things other than money. And I am becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the idea that we put people's names on buildings because of money, and we don't put people's names on buildings for the other remarkable things they might be doing for the project or for the organization. So I'm having mixed feelings. My favorite client decided not to do naming opportunities, interestingly enough. And everybody was saying, oh, people are never going to give. People are never going to give. Well, that has turned out to be false. People don't give because of naming opportunities. They give because they want to see your organization do something special. And it takes a little while for people to get used to the fact that you're not offering naming opportunities, but it is at least worth a conversation. What that organization, I think, is going to do at the end of the campaign is to have one great big display in the major room of their facility where everyone who has contributed in any way to their campaign will have their names listed, probably in random order, or if not randomly, they will probably do it alphabetically. And which is just in keeping with who they are. So I want to get each of you to at least think about that, to think about what your practices are. Now, to get to your specific, perhaps more helpful question, there is a fair amount of talk going on, and it has gradually gotten larger, about whether naming opportunities, for example, whether the policies should list a time period, right, after which a donor's name will be taken down from the wall, right? So there is sort of this current feeling that if somebody gives $100,000 to name a room or a space, that in the policies it should say this name is good for 10 years, right? After which you got to buy the bloody thing again. Now, I can't say that appeals to me. I understand there are some places where we have seen that. At Lincoln Center, for example, there have been a couple of great, huge, big naming opportunities right here in New York. And there was this whole big brouhaha because then somebody else came along and wanted the naming opportunity, right? And they told the first guy to get it, they were going to take his name off and they were going to sell it to the next guy. Don't have your head turned by that. Most organizations are not Lincoln Center. And most organizations don't have the kinds of donors that want to give those kinds of money to Lincoln Center. So I think you are better suited. Your conversation and thinking will serve your organization better if you worry less about whether you can sell the naming opportunity again and how you can handle it should there be a renovation where somebody else's name would get put up, or should the building be sold or come down, or, I mean, there are things that will happen that may change the naming opportunities. And I think the idea is not that you're going to go and get someone to pony up again to get their name on the wall. That misses the point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely less of the issue. More of the issue is what happens when the building gets torn down or re-renovated or whatever, they need to do construction again. So there needs to be some acknowledgement or language about what happens when the building no longer exists or the program no longer exists or the need to fundraise again and renovate, something like that.
And those are issues that are beautifully solved, or that can be beautifully solved. You can take, if you're going to just, going to tear down a building with a lot of plaques, you can take all of those plaques down, polish them up, and create a whole plaque wall of all of the plaques that were in the earlier building on which your new facility is going to whose shoulders your new facility is going to stand. Right? I mean, plaquing is not sale. It's not sales, right? It is appreciating people's generosity, and you should develop your campaign policies in that, with that idea in mind. Oh, all right. Hot under the collar, Amy.
Yeah, there's a lot of good chat going on in the chat box too. But I'm going to turn to Miriam's question. Miriam's asking, what is the role of the development director in the capital campaign? Keeping the train on track, being involved with the feasibility study, interviews, direct asks. She's asking because she's trying to understand her role. In the few months that they've started working on pre-planning, she's felt more like an executive assistant than anything else, writing, editing, rewriting, compiling reports. The reality is it's all of the above. Right? I mean, working in conjunction with an advisor or a consultant and the executive director to keep the train on track. And I think, to me, a lot of it is behind the scenes work and helping the board members and the executive director shine in their public-facing, forward-facing roles. Sometimes whether you're in a campaign or not, I think of the development director as sort of the marionette, and the board members and the executive directors are the puppets, and you're sort of telling them what to do and who to call and when to go out and who to meet with. And you are doing a lot of the coordinating. What would you like to add?
I just a little story, which is that my original mentor in this field, really the guy who got me going in this field many years ago. When I first got to know him, he was the head development person at a college. And he had, the president of the college wasn't a particularly good fundraiser, naturally. He didn't ask for gifts very well. And my friend John, my mentor friend John, said to me once, he said, really my role is being the vice president for advancement. He said, my role is to make Keith look terrific. Keith was the president. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. He did whatever he could to make the head of the organization, the president for whom he worked, be successful, look successful, feel successful, look great in the eyes of the donors. And that took often a lot of dancing around behind the scenes to make that happen. But in John's opinion, his job was never to be the front person, or when he was the front person, it was always to pass the credit on to the president. I always thought that was pretty smart. And
I think that's right. I mean, and hopefully that means that you have an executive director or a president who's willing to be the face of the organization, who's willing to step out there and talk about the vision. But your job as the development director is to make sure that they're prepared and ready to have those donor conversations, to give that speech, to be in front of people. And listen, sometimes you're going to be the one who's doing it too. There's more than enough work to go around. So sometimes you will be in those donor meetings. Sometimes you will be helping prepare board members and going with them. Sometimes you will be doing those conversations, but more often than not, it's more of the behind the scenes work in my experience.
Yeah, but I tell you, the behind the scenes work is powerful work. Right? I mean, you can say you feel like a glorified secretary. The reality is that those of us who work behind the scenes have an outsized role and outsized power. Our names may not be up there. People may not point to us, but without us, stuff doesn't happen. So I've always liked that behind the scenes role.
Oh, we're the puppet masters. We make everything happen. Yeah. I always think of them as pulling all the strings for the board members, the executive director. Everybody knows where to go and what to do and what to say because of the development director. So you're really the one in charge. Don't worry, Miriam. All right.
Amy, can I give just a little brief explanation of impact investing? I do not know a lot about it, but Karen, let me explain her to anyone else who's interested in it. Here is the very, very basic, simple gist of impact investing. And that is that there are a lot of people who have money in the stock market, right? And when they have money in the stock market, they have only a vague idea where their money is and what their money is making happen. It is possible for people to take that very same money they have invested sort of out there in whatever, right, mutual fund or whatever, wherever they have it, and invest it closer to home in an organization they trust, right? And that is more and more people are thinking about that. So, for example, someone can invest in the Northern Forest Center. They have a program all set up for that. And that means that they take whatever money they may be investing elsewhere, they pull it out and they invest in that. Now, the Northern Forest Center has to pay them interest, or dividends in the same way any other investment would, right? But they're investing with people in an organization they know. So it's really a very simple concept. Now, the organization needs to have an income stream to pay, right? To pay the interest and dividends, to pay the investor, because it's not free money, right? They're essentially just shifting their priorities to something local. It's a really interesting idea. If you do a Google search on it, impact investing, there's a lot out there. And I am way not an expert, but that is the sort of my simplistic view of it.
All right, let's go to Sandy's question. Sandy says, we've been a small 501c3 for a long time, never done a capital campaign. What is an average amount to be raised that is realistic? Sandy, what a question. So, the honest answer is there is no average, right? We work with organizations right now who are having campaigns anywhere from $1 million campaigns to $100 million plus campaigns. There's absolutely no average. What your campaign goal should be is a collection of what it will cost to fulfill the vision for your organization. So first, you identify what are your campaign objectives? What do you need to raise money for to make happen the vision for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years of your organization? And how much will that cost? And, Andrea, you were talking about some interesting concepts about campaign goals for the first time, thinking about what's the most that you can realistically raise right now in this time. So, Sandy, for your organization, it might be $1 million that's possible to be raised from the connections you have, from the donors you have for the vision of your organization. Maybe it's 10 million, maybe it's 100 million. So really, no average. All right. Who's next?
Okay, let's see. Interesting topic on naming opportunities. Our previous head of school named just about everything in the school. With our campaign, we are honoring a retired employee and asking donors to put their monies towards the naming of our new addition. We keep track of all named rooms, locations in our school, so they will remain named. I personally like campaign donor walls for all amounts given. So thank you for sharing that. That's terrific practice. Questions. All right. How about this one? Dave has asked, what are your insights about creating a culture of peer solicitation in a community? For example, alumni of a school who aren't development staff members, asking fellow alumni for support. Here is my belief about that. My answer about whether you should do that. Yes. Yes. Peer asks are great, right? Particularly if the person doing the asking has already given generously. Don't let people ask other people for money if they themselves haven't given. That's a big mistake. But to the extent you can take people who have given, get them to share their excitement about the campaign and solicit others, ask others to give, ask their friends to give, that will be successful. Now, you may not want to do it in the largest gifts in the early phase of the campaign. That's my husband getting waving. But the lead gifts, the top 20, 30 gifts are going to want to be solicited in quite a different way. They may still involve other volunteers who know those people, but you're not just going to send people out to ask for those largest gifts without keeping more control of it. But in the public phase of the campaign, you can do a lot of that, right?
All right. So there's an anonymous attendee, who's telling us about the silent phase of their campaign. I'm not sure there's a question in there. If there is, send it to us in one sentence or less so we can get to it quickly. Donna, our 125-year-old building burnt down. We are struggling to get the building renovated, and naming seemed the natural way. Okay, I hope you can do it that way. Some donors will care about naming opportunities, others not. But, you say that the building burned down in 2015. That was 6 years ago now. So I wonder what's going on or what's getting in the way of raising the money and getting the new building renovated and named. Hopefully you would be able to do that in 2 to 3 years. So feel free to reach out and tell us what's keeping you stuck or what's getting in the way, what's happening there. Okay.
So Julie has said they received a $41,000 gift from one donor and would like to use that as a matching funds call. Any hidden challenges? So, Julie, that makes perfectly good sense depending on where in the campaign you are. Right? You don't want to extend a matching funds call for $41,000 to get people to give small gifts to that if you are still soliciting your largest gifts. Because you don't want your largest donors to say, well, okay, we'll give $5,000 and then we're done, right? $5,000 towards 41. If your campaign goal is $1 million and you received a $41,000 challenge, you need to be super careful that you're taking care of those large gifts before you invite people to give matching funds at the lower levels. So mind carefully the order of solicitation.
Excellent. All right. Janine says we have rooms that were refurnished several years ago with a plaque. They need to be refurnished again. Some of these that donated years ago have passed. Can we reassign those room names, or do we have to ask their descendants if we can? Ideally, you would have had language when you initially named some of those things. If that didn't happen, I think the board, to me, can vote to say we're going to still honor those people by putting those plaques in one place, just like Andrea mentioned. So you're not going to get rid of those plaques. You're going to make sure that those people's names are hung up in somewhere in your building in perpetuity. But from now on, whenever you do a gift agreement, you're going to have language that says, this gift is good for 10 years and or until we need to refurnish or renovate, so that everybody's on that same page. Going to descendants is really, really challenging. Okay.
Right. Cheryl, you've mentioned the use of a donor discussion guide. Is that the starting point before a broader Zoom call? We encourage people to use a donor discussion guide in all of their one-on-one conversations with major donors when they're talking about the project and soliciting the largest gifts. That's really not and volunteers at the broader phase of the campaign might use it also. It's a very simple and effective way to help people structure their conversations. So I wouldn't use it on a group call, right? These are designed to be one-on-one conversation outlines, if you will.
All right, Melissa is asking, do you think naming opportunities is more of an incentive for those who haven't given but are looking to see who else supports the institution before making their own decision to support? I don't think so. Honestly, I think that some people love naming opportunities. Other people probably don't care. And so for those people that it's important to, it's a nice benefit incentive. Some people do love seeing their names in a room. It's part of that intrinsic value, feeling great about what they can do for the organization. Just like with donor clubs or donor lists in a annual report, people do look to see who's given at what levels. And so, there is something to paying attention to that, but, names aren't going to be up on a building until most of those or all of those lead gifts have come in. So I don't know if you're talking about literally or figuratively. Maybe I'm taking this question too literally.
Terry DeMarco has asked this. Do you advise a groundbreaking event during the silent phase of the campaign? So I'm so glad you asked this question because I've just been wrestling with it. There are some times when an organization has a groundbreaking and you are nowhere near finishing the silent phase of your campaign, right? You still have a bunch of large gifts to bring in. And the organization has decided to have a groundbreaking because they have enough cash reserves, right? So that they can break ground without taking too much of a risk. Now, in that case, you do want to have a groundbreaking event, but you don't have to have a groundbreaking event that then moves you into the public phase of the campaign, right? Now, that sounds a little funny. It's like splitting hairs, I suppose. But I think you can use it to let people know about the project, to let people know that the ground is being broken and that the project is starting. You can get all excited about what is to be without focusing extensively on the campaign itself, on how much money has been raised and how much is left to be raised, which is what a campaign kickoff does, right? When you get to the difference between the quiet phase and the public phase of a campaign, you are ready to announce your public goal, the goal that you actually will settle on for your campaign, the final goal. And you may not be ready to do that at the groundbreaking event. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have one, doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about the project, but it means that you're not announcing a fundraising goal, the final campaign goal. That you can do later once you've tied down the rest of your lead gifts.
Donna's asking a great question. She says, we're an all-volunteer organization. I'm the only development volunteer, and we've already raised several $1 million, but we need to raise another $3 million to finish our auditorium. We have no structure, and my challenge is how to herd cats to get this organized. I am so happy you asked this question, Donna. One of the things that we are proudest of, I think, at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, many things to be proud of, but honestly, is the organization, the systems, the structure, the strategy that we provide in the toolkit, in addition to all the support we provide. So there is a level that you can join. We call it our Essentials Toolkit. And I think that it will give you a lot of the structure, the organization, the discipline, the support, the networking, and the tools that you need to run your campaign successfully. It's amazing that you've already raised several $1 million with no staff. So I feel confident that you can do it. But do check out the Capital Campaign Toolkit website and see if, being a member of the toolkit wouldn't help give you all that structure and organization that you're looking for.
And we do have some sample donor discussion guides inside the toolkit, by the way. So Hans has asked this, in your experience, what percentage are campaign costs of the total project budget? Is there a maximum you try to stay below, 8 to 12%, or a maximum of 15% of the total project budget? It's we think of it as a maximum, not of the total project budget, but of the total campaign. And there is somewhat of a difference, because it's not uncommon for a project to have a much bigger budget than the campaign, where the campaign is only raising some of the money for the project. Other funding sources might come in other ways, right? Loans, for example, or government, tax credit money or other. So we do like to think about the campaign as being the campaign costs as being a percentage of the campaign. The number we generally bat about is 10%, not because it is always the right number, but because the math is so simple, and people can take in simple math. Right? It works. If you have a campaign of any size, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, it probably won't cost you 10%. It probably won't cost 10% of that goal. But if you start people thinking that way and you spend less than that on your campaign, everyone's going to be happy. If you start with 7% and it costs 10%, everybody's going to be sad. So there is something about saying, well, our rule of thumb is 10%, and then you can build a budget and see if what you need to spend really fits within that 10%. Many campaigns, how much money you have to spend on a campaign depends in part, and this is going to sound funny, but it depends in part on the style of your organization. Right? I have worked for organizations where the style of the organization was to have their campaign kickoff in a tent with hot chocolate on the building site. And believe me, that doesn't cost anywhere near what it costs to have a full course meal at a formal event, right? I can cover the cost of hot chocolate and donuts any day. Right. So, and of course, the hot chocolate and donuts are not appropriate for every organization, but they are appropriate for some. Right. So you have to know the style that fits your organization before you really have a way of thinking about your campaign budget.
All right. Sandy's asking, and I think this is probably the last question, and then I'm going to let you say something on committees as we wrap up. Sandy's asking, as mentioned, she's new to this. What's the quiet versus the public phase of the campaign? And I think that those are phrases that we take for granted and we throw out a lot. So why don't we define those? Andrea, you want me to, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. The quiet phase of the campaign is the phase of the campaign in which you are raising the largest. Oh, hang on.
Okay, I'll get it. You mute yourself. Okay, excellent. So we're going to talk about the quiet phase versus the public phase. The quiet phase is really when you are talking to individual donors one-on-one and asking for leadership level gifts. And those first gifts from your campaign committee, your largest donors, and your board members, you're keeping it in the family, right? The public phase is, and during the quiet phase, you are going to raise 60, 70, or even 80% of the campaign dollars before you ever go, quote unquote, public. Now, that doesn't mean that the public doesn't know that you've got a project. You've probably got some construction going on. There's going to be something potentially on your website about the vision for the future of your organization. But in the public phase, until you get to the public phase, you have not done a press release. You have not publicly announced the campaign goal or the final amount that you're raising money for. And you have not started to ask the community to contribute to your campaign. That's what the public phase is for. That's when you'll do crowdsourcing and direct mail and bulk solicitations and lots of social media requests and things like that. The quiet phase is really for talking one-on-one to people about the project you're working for and inviting those lead donors to participate. All right, Andrea, final words on campaign committees, and we're going to wrap up this awesome session.
So I want to implore all of you to think about campaign volunteers and committees not as being a pain in the neck, but as providing real opportunity if you think carefully and structure them well. They really can be quite magical. But you have to take them seriously. And this is a wonderful time as you move into a capital campaign, as you develop a capital campaign, to learn how to do that really well. So don't just assume you can toss it off. Actually, do some research on how to manage campaign committees, how to manage volunteers, how to use them well, how to use committees to draw people closer. If you get good at that skill, I tell you, it will transform the way you do business. Right. And I mean, it's incredibly powerful and effective. And I see relatively few people who take it seriously and do it really well. It feels, for many people, it feels like, oh, do I really have to deal with volunteers?
Remember what Andrea said. When you get to the end of your campaign, you're going to look back and you're going to look at who made the biggest gifts, and you are going to find that they are the people that you engaged from the beginning or on various committees throughout your campaign. So, and it doesn't happen by accident. It's not magic. It's strategic, it's thoughtful, it's planned out. And those are the organizations that raise the most money. So,
Amy,
all right.
That was a terrific concluding statement. So I have to tell everybody, next week is Memorial Day. Monday is Memorial Day. We will not be here. We will not be doing this, but we will be back the next week. In fact, my guest, Amy, is going to be on vacation the following week. And my wonderful friend and co-author and collaborator, Andy Robinson, who was on this call for a while today, will be joining me, and we will be talking about training your board, training volunteers, how to think about it. Andy is a master at that, and he's a wonderful guy. So
don't miss it.
Don't miss it. It's going to be fun. All right.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy Memorial Day, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.